We we are an organization that is dedicated to connecting and protecting your favorite wild places. And one of the key words in that is your. So your favorite wild place might be your backyard. It might be national forests that you have to travel to. It might be that you're lucky enough to live right near the national forest. And all of these places are important and all of these places are wonderful. And we really want them to be protected and connected. Of course, we can't do everything, and so we focus. And the two things that we're primarily focused on right now are protecting water quality and improving habitat connectivity. Protecting water quality, one of our main focuses there is on preventing PFAS contamination of our waters. And we do this by writing policy papers, issuing action alerts so that you can comment on things that are happening. All of our efforts at Wild Virginia are very collaborative, including our water protection efforts. And one of the things that we're super proud of that we've just started doing in the past 2 years is our Water Advocates program. And this is a program where people within it are coming from all parts of the state, all different backgrounds, and they come together and learn how to advocate for the water that they care most about. And so this has been a really great thing that we're happy about, and we'll be continuing in the future. And then our second main focus is on improving habitat connectivity. And again, this is a very collaborative effort. We are one of the co-founders and currently probably the main driving force behind the Virginia Safe Wildlife Corridors Collaborative, which is a group of 38 different partners that are coming together to try to improve habitat connectivity, both for animals and also for people, in the sense of, for one thing, preventing collisions. So when deer have to cross a road, and people are driving down that road, it doesn't usually end well, particularly for the deer, but oftentimes not for the people either. Right now, there are bills in front of the state legislature to try to find funding to learn about and improve the areas that most need to be connected. So that kind of leads me to our guest for tonight, who is Leigh Ann Henion. Let me try to advance the slide. Yes. So warm welcome to Leigh Ann. She has recently written a book called Night Magic. And I first heard about the book actually from Leigh Ann herself, because she sent an email to Wild Virginia to say that she thought that her book is something that people who are interested in Wild Virginia would also be interested in. And one of the things that she pointed out in that email is that darkness itself is a habitat. So when we talk about habitat connectivity, I know I often think about, a forest here and a highway running through it and a forest over there and animals wanting to move between those forests. But darkness itself is a habitat, and being able to navigate often requires darkness, something that is becoming increasingly in short supply. So we got really excited about the book, and fortunately, Leigh Ann was coming to Charlottesville to New Dominion Bookstore to give a talk, and I live in Charlottesville, so I was able to come and hear her speak, and got super excited, as I think all of you are going to. And so what I think we're going to experience tonight is the beginning of a journey, and hopefully it's a journey that we're all able to continue in our own way by getting outside in the night. And here you see some of the praise that various other authors have given to the book. So Night Magic is a beautiful journey. It's dazzling. Prepare to be enchanted, which I think all of you will tonight. And prepare to love the darkness, which maybe is a little bit more of a stretch for some of us. And what we're excited about tonight is that on the beginning of our journey into the night, we have Leigh Ann here as our inspiring and wise guide. So I don't want to say too much more because I want Leigh Ann to have plenty of time to talk, but I do have one more thing to say, which is that if you listen to this webinar and get excited about reading the book and want to have a chance to talk about it more with other people, maybe talk about your own experiences, enjoying the night, please feel welcome to come to our book club. It meets via Zoom. Then it will be on Monday, February 10th, starting at 7 o'clock. You can go to the Wild Virginia website and you'll be able to link through to our Eventbrite page and sign up for book club if you're interested in it. So a couple of housekeeping things. If you have questions, please type them into the Q&A, and at towards the end of the webinar, hopefully we'll have a chance to go through some of those questions and get some answers for you. I'm going to be showing some background slides just so that you can see some of these beautiful creatures as Leigh Ann is talking. They will sort of be backgrounds, so you can kind of decide how you want to arrange your Zoom screen if you want to have a chance to see more of the speaker or more of these background slides. And I think that is about all that I have to say, and I am just so excited to hear what Leigh Ann has to tell us.
Thanks so much. Thanks for the introduction. And I wish I could see everyone. It's so nice to have you here. I'm grateful that you've joined. In a way, I can't see you, so it's almost as if I am speaking into the darkness, but I trust that you are there. So Night Magic was inspired originally by a story I wrote for the Washington Post magazine about synchronous fireflies in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. So this is actually a photograph from Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And this happened because I had an editor beloved editor, worked with them for many, many years. And they did an issue of the Washington Post magazine during the pandemic, and it was travel writers not traveling because no one was traveling. So how are you going to do that? The next issue was travelers traveling close to home. And he reached out and he asked me, he said, is there anything kind of in your region that you have always wanted to experience and you just never have? And so I said, yes, I want to experience synchronous fireflies. So I was so fortunate to be able to go to the synchronous firefly event that's held in the park by lottery. So I attended the event. It was extraordinary. I also was able to witness synchronous fireflies on another patch of private land nearby. So night after night, I was wandering in the dark, sometimes in groups of hundreds of people, and the fireflies were gorgeous, and they really fit as I had pitched my story. I said, in dark times, I'm going to go search for light rising like a form of hope. Yes, I think that's how I pitched it, something along those lines. And that's how it felt. But also, as I was wandering around in the dark with people without flashlights, I realized how rare of an experience that was. To be in a crowd, and if someone turned on a flashlight, everyone was like, oh, no, 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 don't do this. So to have that darkness was incredibly restorative to me. After spending so much time on screens and with artificial light, it was such a novel experience to spend time in the dark. That I really couldn't get over it. And so in the process, I also learned a lot about light pollution. And light pollution is growing exponentially. We really don't talk about it all that much. And one of the things that I noticed is that when we do talk about light pollution, we often talk about it in terms of light and what light is taking away and the harm of light. But my experience with the fireflies really inspired me to start thinking about not about what light was taking away, but what darkness might have to offer. Because I think that that's a framework that we don't really talk about a lot when we're talking about darkness. because, you know, in our culture, a lot of our terminology, many of our stories, you know, it's light is good, darkness is bad, light is life, darkness is death. So I had this experience where I was realizing that darkness nourished many different life forms, because when I was out searching for fireflies, I, in the end, discovered blue ghost fireflies, not just synchronous fireflies, but blue ghosts. Many of you maybe have seen blue ghosts. I was not familiar at that time, but blue ghosts, if you're not familiar, they glow neon blue and they stay lit for up to 60 seconds. So instead of having flashing, you get neon blue, almost like riding in the night, just moving around like little blue fairies. And it's extraordinary. And I was also struck by synchronous fireflies. I thought maybe synchronous fireflies kind of flashed, then went dark, and flashed and went dark. But actually, they really kind of move like the northern lights. It's like this twinkling, this whoosh of light on the forest floor, because these fireflies are communicating with the fireflies next to them. And so learning about the diversity of firefly species was amazing. And common species, you know, probably what we most commonly see is called the Big Dipper. But even in my own yard, I've come to realize that I have multiple species of fireflies. And I was completely inspired when I learned that when we see a firefly, it's really at the kind of hurrah end stage of its life. But when you see fireflies rising in your yard, in a forest, they have been there in larval form for potentially years. And those larval forms have been glowing. There are the little seeds of light in the darkest nights, in the harshest winter. There have been these little seeds of light just waiting for the moment to rise. So all of this was really meaningful. And so the story ran, and readers started writing me letters. Strangers were taking the time to reach out to tell me that my story had inspired them to turn their porch lights out more often. And I thought, that's amazing. You know, it is, this story has inspired someone to take an actual action, to make a change in their habits, in their lives. And it's really hard to do. And then I was just completely inspired. And I thought, if I have learned this much from fireflies, what might I learn from migrating salamanders and owls and moths and bats and all of these other creatures that depend on darkness to thrive? And so that's really how the project got started. And I'm just gonna read a little intro. It's kind of like a webinar reading. But I want to read just the preface of the book to kind of give you an idea of the quest. So it really in the end was a quest to appreciate darkness and to better understand my relationship to darkness by better understanding these other animals and plants, the different species relationship to darkness. So years ago, I heard a story about a boy who was lost alone in the woods. When a man from the search and rescue team found that child, curled like a baby rabbit among leaf litter, he did not lift him from the forest floor. He did not whisk the boy away to an artificially lit, human-built space. Instead, he lowered himself to the ground beside the boy and asked him to describe what he had heard and seen and felt during the long hours he'd spent in the dark, terrified. At his rescuer's prompting, the boy described the sounds of creatures cackling, the feel of tiny feet tickling his skin. In return, the man, to the best of his ability, explained what had been going on around him. That first responder understood that for the rest of the boy's life, his memory would wander back to that place. And if he had been properly introduced to the creatures he'd encountered there in the dark, he would not have to continue living in fear of them. Unfortunately, most of us are rarely advised to hold space for darkness, and it's difficult to find guides that might help us better relate to it. Against darkness, the Western world has a deep cultural bias. Almost every storyline we're familiar with suggests that we should banish it, as quickly as possible. Because darkness is often presented as a void of doom rather than a force of nature that nourishes lives, including our own. But darkness is an integral and essential part of the human experience, and it's one that we are collectively losing. Organizations ranging from Dark Sky International to the American Medical Association have implored the public to fight light pollution, which has been shown to cause increased rates of diabetes, cancer, and a variety of other ills, as well as degradation to entire ecosystems. Still, light pollution continues to grow. What might we discover if we pause to consider what darkness offers? What might happen if we, as a species, stopped battling darkness as something to be conquered and instead started working with it in partnership? This is the story of how I set out to recenter darkness by spending time with some of the diverse and awe-inspiring life forms that are nurtured by it. We are surrounded by animals who rise with the moon, gigantic moths and nocturnal blooms that reveal themselves incrementally as light fades. In the past, I might have conceptualized a journey to align with natural darkness as requiring a jaunt to the Canary Islands, the darkest place on Earth. I might have neglected my Southern Appalachian homeland, but we are increasingly in need of models of how to find wonder on our own patch of planet. In this way, I hope my quest will strike curiosity that can be applied by anyone to any nocturnal landscape. And so really, this is a very personal journey. It's a personal narrative. And oftentimes I went out seeking guides to help me. So I really kind of feel like in the beginning of the book, I kind of that the child lost and not familiar with what I'm hearing and experiencing when I go outside. And hopefully by the end, I become a guide, and hopefully, just to inspire people to explore their own environments, because darkness is a connector, but the the special unique biodiversity of places specific to where we are. But a lot of the species in the book are species that are also in Virginia. I'm based in Boone, North Carolina, and I focused specifically on Southern Appalachia. I did go up a little bit kind of north, like up through Ohio. So the Appalachian Mountains there, I went as far north as there and as far south as Alabama. But I followed the Appalachian chain throughout because I felt like it was important to focus on my home landscape. And one of the great surprises of the book is that, often I went out seeking these species, and ultimately I ended up finding them in my own neighborhood and sometimes in my own yard, which is pretty shocking. I heard that Wild Virginia has done a webinar on vernal pools, which I personally, I call them ephemeral pools. It's vernal or ephemeral pools. And I just love ephemeral pools just because, the fact that these are pools that don't, a lot of times they're not there. So they're temporary pools fed by snowmelt and rain. And this is where spotted salamanders, are in darkness. They're underground, where really we don't know much about their lives. And they only come out, a couple weeks in spring to migrate to these vernal pools to procreate. And a lot of different species come to these pools because fish can't establish populations. So it's a relatively safe place for them to procreate. And a single small ephemeral pool can have more biodiversity than acres of surrounding land. They're just these, when I hear spring peepers now, it's like, oh, where's the ephemeral pool? They're deafeningly loud sometimes. There's so much life in these pools. So one of the amazing things that I learned about spotted salamanders, which is, so I set out and I said, okay, I'm going to have kind of a list of species, nocturnal species that I want to spend time with and learn from. And one of them was the spotted salamanders. So these are spotted salamander eggs. And one of the most amazing things that I learned about them is that they have this amazing relationship with algae. So scientists have known for quite a while that algae blooms in these eggs. It actually blooms at the very moment that these salamanders develop a nervous system, and the algae blooms, and that's extraordinary enough, creating oxygen. But really, pretty recently, they've discovered that these salamanders actually have algae in their cells. So these animals that really don't see daylight, and even when they're in that small period of procreation, they're hiding under leaves, they want to be in the dark, but their eggs are often exposed to sunlight, and there's this relationship there that's amazing. But they photosynthesize. So I found that incredibly extraordinary. Go in search of nocturnal creatures, and they are the only vertebrates known to photosynthesize. And it's pretty extraordinary. And if you go to an ephemeral pool after eggs have been laid, I mean, you can kind of day by day in daylight watch that happening in the eggs. But to know that it's in their cells is really extraordinary. So I spent a lot of time with owls. I actually was hoping to get to know saw-whet owls. But as it turns out, some friends of mine ended up with a screech owl family in their neighborhood. And a pretty wild story, actually. Still can't believe that this happened at the exact time that I was trying to, get to know owls, that this happened. But there's actually an astronomer who lives down the street from a friend, and he had put up an owl box and waiting for owls to come and nest. He had the cameras in there. There were some owls that came to house hunt, because owls house hunt, which is, I love that. So they came and they were spending time, and at just that time, a broken street light was fixed in their neighborhood. And so when that street light went on with LED blue lighting, the owls fled. And nobody's quite sure if that's exactly why that happened, but they did. So they fled, and they ended up in another friend's yard in a darker part of the neighborhood, in a natural nest cavity of an older tree that had been left. And so I was able to spend a lot of time with the screech owl family, and to consider a lot about light and dark. And owls, they have a reputation for being incredibly wise, and they taught me many things, including, I am embarrassed to say, what a screech owl sounds like. Because when I started this journey, I love birds. I enjoy, kind of casual birding, but I'm not a birder. And early on, I mistook the sound of a mourning dove for an owl. But I do stand by, I think that mourning doves actually sound more like owls than owls sometimes. Because, in children's book, that hoo hoo, that's kind of a mourning dove. I think screech owls are a little more, the whinny. It's like little ponies in trees. So that was really wonderful to start to get to know the sounds of my home environment, the sounds of places that I thought that I knew, that I actually realized I didn't know well at all for a full half of, temporal time. So these are glowworms. Those are glowworms actually in New Zealand. And so I had always wanted to go to New Zealand to see these famous glowworms. If you're not familiar with them, tourists flock to New Zealand to see them. You go into caves. Sometimes you can, take a canoe, and it's just, surrounded by these neon blue glowworms. I've come to understand that also in New Zealand, you can walk trails, and they're just along the forest floor. But early on, back when I was searching for fireflies, incredibly striking to me, I had no idea that Southern Appalachia, Virginia included, is one of the only other places on Earth that is home to neon blue glowworms. And so a lot of people call a lot of different things glowworms. Some people call firefly larvae glowworms, but when I talk about glowworms, I'm generally talking about fungus gnat larvae, which in New Zealand that's a fungus gnat larvae, and in Southern Appalachia it's a fungus gnat larvae, Ophelia photoni, and it glows neon blue. It's specific, and it is fantastic. So often you'll find glowworms in Southern Appalachia, and I've now found them many times, many different places. At this point, I feel like they're all over the place, and we just don't know that they're there because I'm not the only one who doesn't usually walk around in the dark without a flashlight. But so you'll often find them on road embankments and stream embankments. I've seen them on road embankments many, many times, including, spoiler alert, a road embankment in my neighborhood that I have driven by for 20 years with my headlights on, never knowing that there was this marvel there that I was willing to travel around the world to see. As a very small population, but still, when you find Ophelia photoni, Southern Appalachian glowworms on a road embankment, if you find a good population, it's like sapphire stars just speckling the ground, and it is just gorgeous and extraordinary, and it was there the whole time and I didn't know. And they're out there. They're out there. There's a whole swath of Virginia that probably has like pretty substantial populations, and we don't know a lot about these glowworms, and the populations are really, there are populations being discovered all the time. So in 2019, the synchronous fireflies that are so famous in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, where tens of thousands of people applied to get, tickets to see them. In 2019, so really pretty recently, there was a synchronous firefly population discovered on Grandfather Mountain in North Carolina. So just, adjacent county to where I live. And beyond the amazing reality that those fireflies have been there, at a tourist attraction where 500,000 people visit a year, when they went out to survey populations to make sure that they could be responsible and safely allow people to view those fireflies, which they do now at an event called Grandfather Glows. But when they went out to survey fireflies, they discovered that they have what I would say is one of the largest known populations of these glowworms. I mean, there's the road, if you've ever been to Grandfather Mountain, and a lot of people have, the approach road that goes up to the famous swinging bridge, that entire road embankment is just spangled with blue stars at night in certain seasons. And just like the blue ghost, I mean, these are seasonal, and you have to be in complete darkness. And more than that, you have to have eyes that are really adjusted to the dark in order to see them. And so that's another thing that was really amazing to me. I went out to learn about these species, and ultimately I learned about my own relationship to the dark, my own bodily function. So, a lot of people, if you ask people, how long do you think it takes your eyes to adjust to the dark? A lot of people will say 20 minutes or 30 minutes. And we do gain most of our night vision ability pretty quickly. So we have like a lot of gain there in the beginning. But human eyes actually will gain night vision a little bit incrementally for hours. So I really get excited to be able to tell people, if you have never pointedly set out to spend time with total darkness, not looking at a phone at all, not using a flashlight, not even the light of a digital watch, if you have really tried to let your eyes adjust, if you've never spent hours in the dark pointedly allowing that to happen, there is a chance that you don't even know your own abilities. So it feels a little bit like a superpower. So glowworms and foxfire, that is bioluminescent fungi, really helped me absorb that, understand it, and almost as a kind of a meditative experience to allow my eyes to adjust, was really fantastic. And it was a really, again, like a restorative experience. And to think that darkness has things to offer. You know, we talk about knowledge as enlightenment. Being kept in the dark is like you're being kept away from knowledge. But this concept that darkness has things, that darkness can reveal things, it's really powerful. So I spent a lot of time with moths, and I actually attended an event called Mothapalooza in Ohio. It is a fantastic experience. It is just as much fun as it sounds. It is a moth festival. Um, and so we have Luna moth, gorgeous, and Cecropia moth. So I had a really intimate experience with Cecropia moth that I talk about in the book. But I think that moths really just get a bad rap. You know, I couldn't believe when I learned, you know, there are hundreds of species of butterflies. Butterflies get all the credit. But there are over 11,000 species of moths. And so many of them are gorgeous. Like these moths are just absolutely gorgeous. You know, and I think a lot of times people think that moths are dull and drab and they're tiny and they want to eat their clothes. But moths are so incredibly important. They really, you know, the landscapes that we view in daylight are made possible by the work of moths in the dark. And all the caterpillars that feed birds, you know, I pretty much, when I saw a caterpillar before I started my night magic journey, I thought, oh, I'm looking at a butterfly in waiting. But almost always, statistically, when you see a caterpillar, you're looking at a moth in waiting. And there are some scientists that actually would argue that moths are as important or even more important globally as pollinators than bees. Not a fight I want to enter, but I think it's really amazing to think about it, to talk about it, because it is something that we just don't think about because we're so focused on daylight as diurnal creatures. So I also spent time at a bat blitz. So I really, Mothapalooza, Bat Blitz. It was a wild time. The field research for the book was really exhausting, but fantastic. So bats were probably, people will say, you know, is there anything that you were like nervous about? You know, it's like the dark. And I was like, okay, maybe bats. So I went into this and I was like, I respect bats. I am bat neutral, sort of, but I came and I was like, I want to be bat positive because bats are amazing. And ultimately, it worked. I went to Bat Blitz and I learned a lot about bats, including, you know, the reality that sometimes for a bat colony, a single tree can be home to hundreds of bats. So that's really heartening in a sense. You know, it's kind of like back to the owl. You know, my friends, they ultimately, by the way, they got that street light, they got it turned off. Their neighborhood is like a dark spot in a lit town, and it's really a sanctuary. So kind of back to that idea of darkness as habitat, a single tree as habitat, a dark yard as habitat, a dark community. You know, kind of like stretching out, but like that these pockets of darkness, that even a single tree can matter to so many creatures is really heartening, I think. So another thing that I went in search of was foxfire. So if you're not familiar with foxfire, foxfire is bioluminescent fungi. And when I was young, my mom has had the foxfire books, which maybe some of you are familiar with the foxfire books. They're these books that, you know, they record Southern Appalachian folkways. And she has had the original books from the 70s. My entire life, I've known about these books. but I didn't realize it was bioluminescent fungi, that's where they got their name, until not that long ago. And then beyond that, I thought that foxfire was a specific species. I didn't understand that foxfire is the blanket term for bioluminescent fungi, which can be found all over the world. Many different species can be found in Southern Appalachia, um, including bitter oysters, which is what's on screen now. So that's bitter oysters as they look in daylight and bitter oysters as they look in the dark. And so I actually found a guide who, one of the few people who I could find, who actually leads foxfire walks in darkness. So kind of teaches people how to walk in the dark. And so if you're walking in the dark, just a kind of a helpful tip, you want to just really make sure your heel toe kind of pronounced so that you're not tripping over things. But so I went out and we found bitter oysters. We saw you know, we saw networks of mycelium on decaying leaves, which looks like glowing cotton candy just all along the trail. It's a really, really enchanted experience. I actually found he introduced us to a species that may be undescribed to science. They're still working on it. And it's something that he found actually after leading a firefly tour, because I said, hey, when you finish leading these night walk tours, do you ever turn your lights on? And he's like, why would I turn my lights on to walk home? Because in the dark, that's how you find things. And so again, to consider that darkness it can reveal things. It's really powerful, and I think it really flips the script in a powerful way, that introduces darkness as having a value different than we generally think of it. So I did end up finding bitter oysters in my neighborhood. I actually realized that I could identify them in the dark, but I didn't know what they looked like in daylight. So that was really interesting experience. Getting to know the night world. Couldn't recognize it in daylight, but so that was again kind of like flipping the script. And another thing that happened when I was in the process of working on this is thinking about, we all, plants are photosensitive creatures. This makes sense. They're photosensitive beings. But we often associate flowers with sunny fields and butterflies. And so when I spent time with moths, it really kind of shook me up to think, okay, butterflies have these whole day blooming landscapes, but moths have night blooming landscapes as well. So I went out in search of moonflowers, and I was kind of looking for tropical species. There are all sorts of different species. I ended up with a friend who I have a friend who's a flower aficionado. She's a kind of a hobbyist flower farmer. And I said, hey, I need help finding a moon garden. I really want to watch night blooming flowers. I want to watch them bloom. And for some people, it's like, that's like watching the grass grow. But I don't know. It's very exciting to me to think about this, because night blooming flowers, there are a lot of species that you can watch as the sun goes down. They begin to relax and open. And it's again, so counterintuitive, because we think of sunlight, things growing, but here we have darkness falling, and these flowers blooming in darkness. So that was, again, really powerful. And ultimately, my friend who I went to help for finding, like, who has a moon garden, she realized that she had accidentally planted a moon garden herself. Okay, so how do you accidentally plant a moon garden? Well, she lives in a house. It's one of the oldest houses in Watauga County, early 1800s. And, she has her own sheep. She shears them. She does a lot of things in accordance to the original inhabitants. If she's going to change her doorknobs, she wants to get period appropriate doorknobs. And so this extends to parts of her garden. So she had a kitchen garden, and in the kitchen garden, she had tried to plant what the original inhabitants of her house would have planted. And what they would have planted ended up being plants with white blooms, lamb's ear, which kind of has a silvery tone and kind of reflects moonlight, and ornamental tobacco, which is night blooming. And so I'm from North Carolina. I actually went on a tour of a cigarette factory when I was a child. That's how old I am. But so in a state that is prizes tobacco, I ended up watching this nocturnal blooming tobacco open, and it does open pretty quickly, and it opens, and when it opens, it emits this incredible floral fragrance. So kind of its stem and leaves kind of smell like tobacco that I'm used to, but its blooms were just like perfume. And it was so amazing to have this plant that I'd always associated with dry tobacco cigarettes to be this living, thirsty, living being was really amazing. And also to think about it as being as supporting like caterpillar. So we found all of these moth caterpillars on the tobacco, and ultimately had these hawk moths, which are like hummingbird size moths, that were just flocking to these night flowers, drawn by the scent. And again, learning about human anatomy and nocturnal experiences. I realized that when these flowers are peaking, so it's like when darkness is falling, human olfactory actually rises. Our sense of smell actually peaks because it's actually also in circadian rhythm. So with circadian rhythm, our sense of smell peaks just as these flowers are blooming. And it's really magnificent. But so my friend was incredibly moved to realize that she had a moon garden, because the original inhabitants of her home were living there pre-electricity, and they had such a different relationship to darkness. What was a really kind of quirky, interesting thing of us going out to watch these flowers bloom, it was just like a regular Saturday for them. It was like this garden would have been nightly entertainment for them, and it was a really gentle, beautiful experience. And the last species that I decided to explore was humans. So it took me my entire journey to realize that, in the beginning of my journey, we marvel over fireflies because they can make light inside of their bodies. But if fireflies studied humans the way that we study fireflies, one of our most notable features would be the fact that we can make light outside of our bodies. We are the only light-making animal. And light pollution is really, we are making so much light that it is now disrupting, our natural rhythms, the natural rhythms of pretty much every life form on Earth. And it's something that we're really just starting to talk about. But again, thinking about that, I really feel like it's important to think about what darkness offers rather than what light takes away. And the process of making fire, which is something that I decided to do, because how could I trace back the origins of artificial light? And I decided to do it by tracing back artificial light to its beginnings. And I learned how to make fire with a bow drill. So I made fire with my hands and sticks. And it was one of the most empowering experiences I've ever had. And it also was a reminder, like when we flip on a switch, we're not necessarily thinking about what's being burned or what's being used to the energy that's going into that. But when you're making a fire and you're working, you're acutely aware, and you're also having to have a real understanding of the various species that are around you, because what tree, you know, the inner bark of a certain tree is good, and there's certain things that are really good for making fires, and certain things that hold moisture that wouldn't be as good. So you really have to get to know a landscape in order to make that light, which is something that we no longer have that experience as animals. And ultimately, you know, this process did really remind me that I am an animal. And, you know, prior to this experience, you know, I didn't really think about the fact that, you know, I learned about fireflies. So I was like closing blinds and turning off lights outside. But in my house, I wasn't really changing much, you know? So I closed those curtains, but I'm just wrapping that light around myself that I am also an animal. And so over the process of spending time with all of these animals and just seeing them react to light, for example, you know, a moth beating itself against a light bulb kind of freaks people out. So, you know, early I said, why would people love butterflies and not love moths? And one of the reasons is because, you know, when they're encountering a moth, it's often when a moth is like being overstimulated by artificial light at a porch or something. But to watch a moth in its natural habitat, that is to say, darkness, is a really serene experience, and a moth is, you know, just going about its business as opposed to beating itself against a light. So very different observational experiences and relational experiences. But so after this, I kind of started to understand myself a little better, like beating myself against a screen. You know, my lights in my house were like super bright. It would be 10 o'clock at night and it's like Vegas. So I've really scaled that back. And so red light doesn't, so there's red spectral light doesn't affect our biological functions as much as blue light. It doesn't even, it actually preserves even some night vision. And it also allows melatonin, so our natural, you know, sleep, we're able to produce melatonin, sleep a little bit better if we don't have that light. So I've started using amber and red bulbs in my house. So kind of as the sunset turns red and amber outside, the lights in my house turn red and amber. I switch over, use lamps. And I found it to be a really relaxing, easing process, you know, because in nature there's an easing of darkness and an easing of light, dusk and dawn. But indoors, we're often kind of just like switch on, switch off, incredibly bright and dark for sleep. But to have that in between time has been really, really enjoyable. And it's helped me just to develop a different relationship to light in my life as well as to darkness. So that's really kind of a general overview of my journey. And I'd really love to just use this. I'd love to, you know, hear some questions and like a little bit, just to hear anything you might be curious about or anything that kind of sparks inspiration in you as I was kind of going over that.
Okay, thank you. That was great. And we do have some questions.
Great.
Let's see, I'll start with one. So as people think of more questions, please put them into the Q&A. But I'll start here. Someone wants to know if you did any work looking at flying squirrels.
I was like, I wish that I had been able to do so. I heard some flying squirrels actually at Bat Blitz for the first time. You know, I was with people who were able to tell me, oh, flying squirrels. But I was really excited to learn a little bit about flying squirrels just in the process. And also, so there's bioluminescence, creatures that make light in their bodies. And then there's biofluorescence, where, you know, an animal would hold that energy and it's revealed by UV light. And flying squirrels, there are a lot of species of flying squirrels that are biofluorescent. So they, you know, under UV light, they actually, they're kind of like a pinkish purple, which is really fun. And that's actually, these are all new discoveries with biofluorescence. Scientists are finding that a lot of these these of animals hold this in their fur, and flying squirrels are one of them. Super exciting. Yeah. And if
So
another thing is, if taking a UV light out and exploring is a whole nother experience, to find those biofluorescent creatures. And again, because not a lot of people are out with UV lights at night, there are a lot of discoveries being made. I mean, I read one not long ago, someone discovered a new biofluorescent species in a parking lot in New Jersey. And so I'm here to tell you, like, if you've never pointedly set out to explore your home environment in the dark, you will find wonders if you do that. Yeah. Are there more questions?
yeah, there are more.
Yeah.
So that's very encouraging that you can find things in a parking lot in New Jersey.
Yeah.
Here's a question from someone who's 8 years old, and they want
Oh,
to know
good.
how you can tell the difference between different types of fireflies, different species.
Oh, such a good question. I am very excited for you to go on this journey. There's so Lynn Faust has a great book. I don't know, it's if you just look up Lynn Faust fireflies, that you'll find it. But she has a great book that can help with this identification. But basically, the way that you can tell different species, and I'm not fluent, but I do try, and I've learned a few. But you can tell by their flash patterns. So one of the ways you can tell, you don't even have to catch them, or you can just go out and you watch. And if you watch, you'll start to kind of notice that some of the fireflies are flashing, and you can kind of think of like Morse code. And then some fireflies kind of do this little dip they'll be lit dip, and you can kind of start to see the different patterns that they're making with light. And so it's really just like we have fingerprints. Every species kind of has its own language, and you can start to decipher if you study. And then in that book, it kind of has like Morse code. It'll show the different light writing that they do. It's a great question.
Can you say one more time the author of the book about that? Lynn
Faust. And
F-O-S-T or F-A-U-S-T? Oh, it's
let's-
okay.
Yeah. We'll find it. I think so, but I don't want to. Okay, it's Lynn, Lynn, Faust.
F-A-U-S-T. Okay, good.
Yeah, and
Just
the
in
book
case
is
anyone.
it's called Fireflies, Glowworms, and Lightning Bugs.
Excellent.
Identification. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, just in case anyone wants
That's
to
a great
dig a little
resource.
deeper into that.
It's a Firefly field guide. Yeah.
So here's another one. This is a fairly straightforward. What was the name of the flowering tobacco plant?
The flowering there are a variety of nocturnal blooming ornamentals. My friend, she had a couple different ones. She had woodland and jasmine, and jasmine has incredibly strong fragrance. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Then the next one is can you talk a little bit more about the algae in the spotted salamanders? Is it a recent discovery? And is it specific to spotted salamanders? And if so, does anyone know why?
Yeah, isn't it? It's so wild. I know. I mean, I can't get over it either. So people have known, scientists have known about algae in the eggs for like probably 100+ years. I think I have the date in the book in Night Magic. I talk a little bit about that history. But pretty recently, it's only been within the last few years, like the last maybe I can't remember the exact date, which is also in the history. But it's fairly recent that they've discovered that the algae is actually in the spotted salamander cells. And yes, it is specific to spotted salamanders. And one of the things that's really exciting about this for scientists is that they've just discovered this in a pretty common salamander. So then, you discover this in a common salamander, and you just start wondering, okay, what else have we been missing? Which is kind of actually how I feel about my yard at night now. But that's how scientists are kind of feeling about this. So I don't know the exact dates, but yes, it's fairly recent and it's amazing.
That's great.
Yeah.
So now we've got, I guess we have um, one question, which is, how long did it take you to do all the field research? And did you notice any differences over the various seasons?
Oh, yeah. So the book is actually so many, I mean, so many things in the book are very specific. So a season of blue ghosts can be 2 to 3 weeks, and you have to catch it just right. And it's dependent on rainfall and temperature and all these different things. So specific to season and so fleeting. The book is I actually divided into seasons. So I kind of follow through the seasons, just the different species that are really active during that time. So yeah, to kind of try to figure out what was going on. It's like, instead of, I have my regular calendar, but then I also have a moon calendar and I have like gauges and I'm talking to scientists. One scientist told me, during the salamander migration, because they're never quite sure when the salamanders will emerge. And she says, we're kind of like midwives waiting for the call, and they'll have scouts go out and it's like, someone's like, is it a big night? Is it a night? Is it happening? So everybody's kind of waiting, and it's like with the blue ghost too, it's like people are scouting. It's like, is it time? Is it happening? So seasonally, that's what's really exciting. It's like every season there's something new that's happening, which is just thrilling. And again, this is like, I this is all landscapes that I thought I knew well. I mean, I would like to think of myself as, like I've explored and been out there, but only to find out that the land that I thought I knew best, I didn't really know at all. Which again is so thrilling. We live in a world where I think people feel like everything's been explored or discovered, or if I haven't discovered it, somebody else has. But no, there's a guy in a New Jersey parking lot with a UV flashlight who discovered, it's like, it's just amazing because the night world is really this unexplored territory, and we're, when we live in a dark place and we're fortunate enough to still have access to that, it's just really exciting. And I hope that my journey can just get people excited to have their own journey. Yeah, and I love that. So at book club, like I hope that people will come to book club and like maybe, talk about, light and dark, but also just their own experiences and like what, people are always asking, like, what might be happening in your part of Virginia at this time, or, just sharing experiences of what they've seen and heard about and, little pockets of cool stuff going on. They're everywhere.
That's going to bring me to the last question that we have time for. And it's actually a combination of sort of two things that people asked. One was, where are Bat Blitz and Mothapalooza and when are they? And the one that's linked, and I'm going to generalize it, is someone asks, is there anyone who leads dark walks in Charlottesville? But I think we could expand that to how do you take those first steps? So it seems to me one choice is to go on something that's organized like Mothapalooza,
Yeah,
and another is to get out there by yourself. And so any advice you can have about finding events to join, organized events, and then maybe a little bit of advice if you don't find such an event, how do you get started on your own?
well, I actually feel like now this is another great thing at book club. I'm like, everybody in their various like spots can say, like, is there anything local? And when you come together, like maybe share, like, I hear that, in Charlottesville, there's a organization holds this, or there's a park in Chilhowie that's having an event, because they tend to be smaller experiences. But I think that like local nonprofits are a great place to start. Just local naturalists, local parks sometimes will do a night walk, or an owl walk. That is, sometimes people have specific things that can, self-guided. So Mothapalooza is in Ohio and it takes place in the summer. I'm not sure of the exact dates for this year, but if you look up Mothapalooza, you'll find it. It's a big Mothapalooza, Ohio. I think maybe July, but it's in summer. And Bat Blitz, I went to a Bat Blitz in Alabama, but so Bat Blitz is mostly bat biologists, but citizens can join. So Bat Blitz actually, it's the, you know, in the they go to different states throughout the Southeast. So each year they will switch so that they're able to survey different populations. But if you look up Bat Blitz, you know, Bat Blitz Southeast, you can generally, you'll find that too, and that also takes place in summer. Those two, the parties take place in summer. Yeah, they those are summer. Yeah, but so I think that just, you know, talking to local naturalists and like parks and you know, even just county recreation centers, like I think that also, you know, I think that places are starting to do more activities like that. And I also think that when you express interest in that, you know, sometimes you can get the ball rolling, you know, like show that there's interest. And you know, a park will say, hey, we actually have someone who is passionate about owls. And it's like, okay, passionate about owls, that's somebody that I want to walk through the woods with, you know. So I think that that's a good start. But I love the idea of, you know, book club, bring it, bring the resources for Virginia. Yeah,
Great. Thanks so much.
it
I
was.
think I think we're at the end of our time.
Yeah.
And I hope that everyone who is here gets a chance to get out, whether it's on their own or whether they discover some local event. Someone in the chat has put checkvirginiabat.org. So maybe that's a
Oh,
source for
fantastic.
a chance to see bats.
Yeah. And I would also just like to say, I mean, truly, if you have never just turned off the light, you know, if you have lights in your backyard and you've never gone and just sat there pointedly attempting to, you know, what can you hear? What can you see? If you've never really set out to do that, I think that if you do that, you will discover something close by. You don't have to go very far at all. That's which is what's so beautiful about it. Things will reveal themselves if you allow yourselves to spend time in the dark.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
It was great to have you. And thanks to all of you who were here to hear about this.
Yes, thank you so much, everybody, for being here. I hope you have wonderful adventures, and I hope you can, you know, I look forward to seeing where it goes. Just sharing with each other in book club. It's exciting.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Take care.
Okay. Good night, everyone.
Bye. Good night.